nkakra na ọkọ na
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to Volume 1, Number 11 of Construmat's Knowledge Sharing Presentation. I'm pleased today to welcome our next distinguished presenter, Mr. David Glendinning. With over 45 years of experience on the construction industry, Mr. Glendinning brings a wealth of knowledge and expertise to our gathering today. During his career, he has spent 30 years as a contractor, gaining hands-on engineering experience with Alfred McAlpin, a prominent British construction company. His notable projects include road contracts in Swaziland and Botswana, where he successfully tackled challenges related to sourcing road-making materials. Additionally, he contributed to the construction of the Morukule 132 MW air-cooled power station, showcasing his engineering prowess. After retiring from contracting, Mr. Glendinning transitioned into a role as a technical and contractual consultant, offering valuable guidance to contractors. He has also been actively involved in a role as a technical and contractual. He has also been actively involved in expanding his alternative dispute resolution experience and currently contributes to the preparation of second edition subcontract documents. Beyond his professional pursuits, he is an avid reader with a keen interest in biographies, personal growth, and health and wellness. Living alongside the Chobe River since 2016, he and his wife enjoy studying elephants and their behavior. Today, we have the privilege of learning from him and his extensive experience in the construction industry. His insights and experiences in technical and contractual consulting, along with his dedication to ADR, make him an invaluable asset to this gathering. Please join me in warmly welcoming Mr. David Glendinning as we dissect the topic disputes across the construction industry. Good morning, sir. The floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me to this gathering, because dispute resolution is unfortunately, in my view, a massive part of our industry. When I was a student, I was taught that engineering should be fun. And to my point, what makes it not so much fun is the dispute side of the industry. Having said that, taking a legal phrase, one must take your victim as you find him, i.e., we have to start from a point where we are at the moment. And as a caveat, I know very little, if anything, about the construction industry in Ghana. And therefore, it would be presumptuous for me to lecture to you who are in Ghana and who will face the day-to-day problems of confronting dispute resolution in Ghana with my views, which perhaps may align a lot, because from my limited researches, Ghana is not that different from Zambia, Zimbabwe, not Zimbabwe so much, and South Africa in terms of where it sits in development. So the question therefore becomes, what is the state of the construction industry in terms of dispute resolution or disputes? I maintain that disputes in the industry is a multi-trillion-dollar problem for the industry, or a benefit for those who actively earn their income from the industry. And therefore, I would like to open it to the floor. What is your opinion? What do you think that perhaps in your position, because you may not yourself be in the front line of dispute resolution, but within your company, what can you do to minimize the cost and time that dispute disputes generate. Over to you, Mami.
Okay, thank you for the question. As he has rightly said, this is open to the floor. This is meant to be an open discussion amongst all of us. So we would really appreciate everyone's contribution. Okay. Would you like to go over the question one more time, just so everyone could get an understanding of the question you wanted to pose?
Let's break it down into Ghana. Is disputes a big part of the industry in Ghana? And if so, what can each individual sitting in this webinar, no matter what part of the industry they are involved in, what can they do to recognize the problem and to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem? For instance, in Ghana, I looked up on the DRBF, and there are only 2 people who are listed as DRBF practitioners in Ghana through the DRBF Foundation. Ellen Bannerman-Quist and Tony O'Neill. Those are the only 2. First of all, as a plug for DRBF, I would suggest that everybody who has anything to do with management in construction and has an interest in dispute avoidance should become members of the DRBF
Recording in progress.
As a vehicle to limiting disputes.
Yes.
Everybody's rather shy behind the...
Right. Like you said, like you rightly said, it would be appropriate for more people to take up the opportunity for training or educate themselves when it comes to dispute resolution, and also to try, like you mentioned, a field that you are an expert in, the alternative dispute resolution options should also be widely accepted, or education should be provided on those areas so that we have more people in the field. So I think that would be my contribution here. If anyone else would want to contribute to this, the floor is open. You can raise your hand and then we invite you to speak. Yes, Dr. Na, would like to hear from you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I am of the opinion that in the Ghanaian construction industry as well, dispute is a major part of the industry. Probably the only difference is that parties tend to shy away from open disputes, or going after alternate dispute resolution processes or even dispute resolution processes, because they don't want to be tagged as litigants or people who are always prone to conflict. So although it's very rife in the industry, it's not publicly known, it's not talked about, it's not put out there often. However, I think that a good way to deal with conflict is recognizing that there's room for conflict where you have different parties taking part in an endeavor and trying to avoid it positively. So for example, you would want to be conversant with your conditions, the conditions you're working with, and be guided by the conditions that you're working with. Even from the very beginning, rolling out your conditions, conditions of contract, you want to be careful about supporting or providing conditions that support an environment that avoids conflict. So if we're careful from the very beginning in how we put together the parties during the agreement process, during the contracting process, then we tend to avoid conflict or minimize the occurrence of conflict in a more positive way, rather than waiting for it to occur and then having it, brew under the carpet until it escalates and gets out of hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Doc, for your question. This is very helpful. Do we have anyone else who would want to contribute to this question? Okay. Mr. David, since you posed the question, yes, do you also have an opinion on the subject matter, whether in relation to Ghana or otherwise?
Well, I've only managed in a quick search to find 2 papers on Ghana.
Okay.
One was 2010, Triggers of Disputes Within Ghanaian Construction Industry, by Asa Kisidu, Fugar, FDK, and E. Badu. That was in 2010. A more recent and probably a better study that I read was Resolve in 2015, Resolving Infrastructure-Related Construction Disputes in Developing Countries, the Ghana Experience, by a gentleman called Joseph Mante. I couldn't find out too much about Mr. Mante, but his paper is worth reading. But I would hope that there are more recent examples of the problem, because as the lady said, there's a statement that says what gets measured can improve. Now, unless we do open up to admitting what the situation is, and let me put it this way, there are disagreements, healthy disagreements or differences of opinion are not disputes. It's when they degenerate into entrenched positions, if you like, and people then start not listening to and attempting to solve the problem together, whether it be, I suppose, the general example would be on a site, the contractor and the engineer, or the engineer's personnel. And from there, it escalates off-site, and before you know it, it's costing somebody time and money. So the point is then, if we take my question 2, and we imagine that we're on a contract with a FIDIC Red Book, which is obviously works designed by the employer, throughout each phase, who has an opportunity to minimize the potential for disputes? It was mentioned just now, if the tender document or the contract document is prepared correctly, that goes a long way. And later on we talk about the FIDIC Golden Principles. That is one of the major parts of the FIDIC Golden Principles, is that the conditions of contract should be so designed to be fair and reasonable, and the risk is carried by that party which is best able to. The industry still, in my view, suffers from what a biased contractor would call a master-servant relationship. The employer is the master, the consultant does his bidding, and the contractor is the servant. Those days are long gone, or should be long gone. We are equal partners, all of us, and we all have a role to play in the success of a project. Any project where the parties are not working together has little chance of being an absolute success. So we then move on to question 3, which I think does need input from the participants. Is who benefits from the prolongation of disputes? And I've listed basically all the participants in a contract. And probably the most important question of all, who is least likely to benefit from the dispute and costs, the disruption and cost of disputes? I think that is probably the million-dollar question. Who would like to hazard a shot at that one?
Okay, I think I'll take a shot here. All right, Jacqueline, I see your hand is raised, so kindly go ahead.
Okay, on the benefit aspect, it depends on the dimension of the dispute. For instance, if it is a contractual issue where the contractor has faltered, the client will be at the benefiting side, obviously. And on the losing part, I think it's the employer who would lose more, because once there is dispute and there is a stall in the project, for example, you are investing in an infrastructure. Once there is a stall prolonged, there will be no infrastructure to show at the end of the project timelines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacqueline. Do we have any more people who would like to contribute to this? Mr. David, so I was thinking, in this scenario, I wanted to look at another dimension. So I was thinking in this case, wouldn't it also be, let's say, legal professionals who would benefit the most? Because at the end of the day, we find lawyers, arbitrators, third parties who would come in to try to settle the dispute. And obviously they would have some charges that would have to be given to them to compensate during the, especially if it's going to be a prolonged one. I find that they might end up benefiting more than anyone else in the original contract parties.
Before I answer, there was another hand.
Yes, Dr. Na.
Okay, so I tend to think that in the short term, you would have different parties benefiting depending on the type of dispute, and some of them have been mentioned already in the short term. But in the long term, where there is protracted dispute in the industry, then the entire industry tends to suffer. Because if, for example, in the beginning, it's the client who is winning, in all the disputes in the short term, then contractors perhaps may shy away from dealing with such a client. On the other hand, if it's the contractor who is winning all the time, then the client in the long term doesn't have the money to fund, because as David said, we're losing time and we're losing money, finances. And in an industry, it's the flow of all these things that make the industry thrive. So in the short term, one or the other party may look like they are gaining the upper hand. But if we want an industry that is thriving and growing and prospering, then as David said, we have to learn to work together. And I do agree with him when he said again that when we're drawing up our contracts, we have this, posture, which is like there's a servant master sort of thing. But now it's long gone. He said that already, that is long gone. If you want a prospering industry, then we have to work together, for the greater good of the industry, and then we all tend to benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. In terms of who does not benefit or who is least likely, most of us work in an industry that is a service industry, and the actual body that we are working for is the public. Particularly, let's say we're building a road. It's the end user is either the taxpayer or the road user. And they definitely, and they are in general without a voice, but they definitely never benefit, in my view, from any of the disputes. If a job takes longer or the cost is, they are the ones that suffer. And most of the time, I can say partly in Southern Africa, they do so in semi-silence. There's an odd article in a newspaper, but it doesn't turn into action either by the politicians or by the construction industry when it is going wrong. Because, as is pointed out, we then reach to the lawyers, the claims consultants, people such as myself. If we had to have a totem, I would suggest we would use the vulture, because that is what we are, or the hyena. Right, we move on to the golden principles. I would strongly suggest that no matter what you do within the industry or within the company, that you download a copy of the golden principles. It's a very small book. It's got a few pages in it, and there are 5 golden principles. And section 6 deals with guidance for drafting of particular conditions of FIDIC contracts. And it is well worth a read, even if you are not involved in drafting contracts, because it gives you a background to it. Recently, RICS brought out a pledge that they encourage participants in the industry, again, and no matter where you are in the industry, there's nothing stopping you, if you believe it is a worthwhile endeavor, to sign the pledge. I would suggest that every company in the construction industry should consider it.
Okay, thank you, Mr. David. Are you able to take us through the 5 golden principles very briefly?
Certainly.
Great.
Golden principle number 1 states that the duties, rights, obligations, roles, and responsibilities of all contract participants must be generally as implied in the general conditions and appropriate to the requirements of the project. So essentially what that means is, if you are entering into a FIDIC contract, or you are preparing the documents for a FIDIC contract, you should not deviate markedly from that. And your particular conditions should be limited to changes that are absolutely necessary, taking your particular project into account. Golden principle number 2 says the particular conditions must be drafted clearly and unambiguously. I'm sure there's a number of people in your audience who have read or been part of situations where the particular conditions did not make sense, and they hadn't been checked by somebody who was experienced in the drafting of particular conditions. And my point would be to everybody, less is more. Be very careful when you change or the amount that you add into the particular conditions. Many particular conditions I have seen actually just say the same thing as the general conditions, but in a different way. The particular condition must add weight to the contract. It must be necessary for the flow of that contract. The third principle says the particular conditions must not change the balance of risk-reward allocation provided for in the general conditions. The point of a contract document like FIDIC is it's been drafted over essentially 90 odd years. It's evolved. The amount of time spent in producing these things, the scenarios that people have considered when they came to the conditions of contract. And let me be clear that they are still not perfect by a long way. I can tell you, as we sit in these subcontract meetings, they take hours and hours of deliberation as to what to put in and what to leave out. So they are never going to be perfect, particularly in the changing world that we live in. But the point is, if you keep the risk profile and the balance in accordance with the contract, both parties, or even including the engineer, know where you stand. If particularly an employer thinks he's going to benefit by changing that because it's his contract and he has the money, somewhere along the line, that probably will come back to haunt. One of the major conditions that employers cross out is the employer's financial arrangements. And because it is a buyer's market, contractors sign their contract even though that's there. As a shopkeeper or any other business, would you allow the customer to tell you when and how he's going to pay you or not pay you? And we're talking massive amounts of money. Contractors, for instance, cannot cover their money that they need if they are not paid. Golden principle number 4 says, all time periods specified in the contract for the contract participants to perform their obligations must be of a reasonable duration. Let's start with the first one that I would put my hobby horse on. The time that contractors or prospective tenderers have to tender a job. I don't know what it's like in Ghana, but I can tell you in this part of the world, suddenly a tender comes out and 2 months later, somebody wants the price because they have used all the float and they are under great pressure. So where do you put it? You put it on the contractor. Now that is not good for the employer, because a rush tender is likely to be a bad tender. And all the way through the industry, we can go contractors doing the same to subcontractors. And golden principle number 5 says that the duties, rights, obligation, roles, and responsibilities of all contract participants must be generally as implied in the general conditions of contract and appropriate to the requirements to the project. That is a big one. That is, we've been through that the particular conditions must be drafted clearly. They must not change the balance, all time periods. And 5.5 says, unless there is a conflict with the governing law of the contract, all formal disputes must be referred to a dispute avoidance adjudication board or a provisional binding decision as a condition precedent to arbitration. I'd be interested to know how many contracts in Ghana do have DAABs or DABs or DRBs or some form, and how many of those are appointed at the start of the contract and not once a dispute arises.
Hi, David. This is Edward. So in Ghana, the standard practice is to often allow for professional institutions to be arbitrators in the event there's contract dispute. So typically, reference is made to either the Ghana Institution of Engineering or the Ghana Institute of Surveyors where it applies.
And how many contracts actually have DAABs or DABs? Because I would doubt that even that 2017 is widely used yet. It's certainly not used. People in Southern Africa have shied away from 2017.
Right. So that is not a common practice yet. It's still fairly new. We rely mostly on the 1999 editions of the conditions of contract mostly. 2017 is fairly new. We are now getting used to what it provides for, and we have ongoing trainings in the country, in the industry generally.
One of the new short form of contract, which is not in itself that short, I recommend everybody should look at that as being, for the general run-of-the-mill contract, probably a better option. It's a lot more, to me, although I haven't been involved in a job yet that has a green book, a second edition, it looks to me to be more user-friendly for the industry. And only FIDIC 2017 should be used for very big contracts. So take your OPRC job. I would have thought that would have been a contract that I would have put out, would have recommended that it be put out on a green book, for instance, if it was going to be a FIDIC contract.
Well, it's interesting. Given the value of those contracts, so my knowledge of Green Book is for contracts worth less than 500,000 USD. Given the value of our OPRCs, I'm not sure, but from the contracts that we have, they are a combination of both FIDIC and NEC for the contracting entities.
Right. Well, what FIDIC found with the first edition of the Green Book is that contracts, it was being used for contracts much bigger than the limit that was recommended. And my view is, depending on the complexity of the job, is probably more important than the value. And to me, this contract is ideal for road contracts. Because whilst our value is high, the complexity is, in terms of other civil engineering projects, not that high. So that is something to think about in the future, but maybe employers have a different view. And of course, until it starts to be used extensively, people shy away from generally people shy away from anything new. I grew up under FIDIC 3. So FIDIC 3 to FIDIC 4 was not a big jump. When 1999 came out, I was definitely, as a contractor, not at all interested in the newfangled contract with 20 clauses. We had 67 or 69 clauses, and that suited us very well, and we knew the document. So it took a long time for 1999 to be accepted in the industry as I was working in. And from my understanding worldwide, the 2017 has had a extraordinarily poor reception over the last 5-7 years.
Right. That's right.
So
hi, David. Would you want to draw some contrast between FIDIC 3, 4th edition, and what we have now?
I think for the time it was the document. Would I go back to it now? In fact, 10 years ago, I had a FIDIC 4 contract, and the engineer was very proud to tell me that he had had a major issue with the employer to get the FIDIC 4 form of contract as the contract document. I think that we have to move on. And my view now is changed, that I believe for big contracts, we have to push to use 2017. As much as people will tell you it's an administrative nightmare, it is right for the time, but it is not right for every job. And therefore, I recommend the consider. I know very little about NEC, but I would first of all ask myself, is the job ripe for a green book? Or is the complexity such that I need to use either a red, a yellow, or a silver book, or one of the many others if it's a specialized contract?
Very well, thank you.
I suppose that we've dealt with what are the current general dispute resolution and dispute avoidance protocols. My experience is that contracts that have a DAB from the start have a better chance of not having disputes than those that do not have. And when a dispute does arise, by having the DAB, they are familiar with the contract and they're able to give a decision or a recommendation much quicker and based on not just the written word, but the nuances of having visited the site, having been part of the contract from the beginning. They are familiar with the parties, they're familiar with the staff. They have identified what we might call the troublemakers, whether they on whoever they are representing or part of. Because one of the big things is contracts are run by people. And many times we do not discuss the problems that people create, which are not technical problems. Technical problems have technical solutions. But human problems are far greater and far harder, particularly for people in the technical industries to deal with, or at least that has been my experience. We tend to shy away from those problems because we do not have the tools to deal with those issues. So we concentrate and we make the dispute all about some technical issue, whereas one would say the problem is not the problem.
That's an interesting view.
Well, privately, I think within your company, it would be good to, outside here, ask each participant that as they grow their careers, will they be moving proactively to be promoters of dispute avoidance, or will they be in the front line of escalating a disagreement to a dispute? You don't have to answer that online because I think it's something that people need to digest, think about, and really commit to it only if they believe in it.
I will take it on board very seriously. I agree with the question.
Well, I think one of the major things is that if nothing else, one day when I do visit Ghana, I will then be able to benchmark and to understand the differences that you may be facing as opposed to what we, or let's put it this way, I am very familiar with within Southern Africa and primarily within Botswana. In many ways, although I would, having said that, I would think that our evolution is out of English law. So we start with the same basis. And probably our construction industries have their foundation in the UK. So I would not expect that our evolution is that different, even though we are 7,000 kilometers apart. But the question is, what do we do going forward? How do we break the old habits that we were taught? How do we make our industry more efficient? And for the people who work in the industry, more fun?
Thank you for posing such well, interesting and also complex question. I would say, sure, we'll digest that and then reflect on it as well. I think since we're having our time is far spent, I was hoping that anyone who had some questions for you would also have the opportunity to ask them. But then before we start that, you've had some discussions about technology and how fast it's evolving. I wanted to find out from you what your thoughts are on the role technology could play in the future when it comes to dispute resolution in our industry.
Well, the talk, as you will notice, that particularly in the last few months, the warnings about AI and what AI can and will not do has been growing exponentially. But years ago, it was said, you won't need lawyers in general because you will go to your computer, you will type in your question, and the AI will give you the answer. So a lot in terms of the technical disputes, I foresee that is a distinct possibility. You will ask the robot, this is my problem. The robot will talk to other robots and you will come out with the answer. But the robots won't be able to deal with the human problems. And the other big problem is, as we found with the internet, I fully expect that the innovators of users of AI will predominantly use it for evil and not for good. So I think we've got to be very, very careful what we do with the modern AI and how it will never be a panacea for solving our problems as long as we are human beings.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. We also have a question from a member in the audience. Jacqueline wants to know what strategies or initiatives can organizations implement to promote a culture of dispute avoidance and early intervention? And also, how can professionals in the field actively advocate for these approaches in respective industries? Thank you, Jacqueline, for the question.
I think the first thing is we have to each in ourselves internalize and perhaps take a leaf out of the RIC book and pledge that we are going to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, because often we can sit on the sideline and say, it's not my problem. I don't have to deal with it. I am not responsible, or I am not the cause of the problem. But if we do that, we're abdicating the opportunity to move forward and to help others gain the perspective. Because one of the major things that I would say, if apart from as I grow older and learn that the more I learn, the less I know. The other thing is that within construction, doing the job right and doing it once is the far easiest and cost-effective way. And I'm sure that whilst we may not have contractors on the line, many contractors have not learned that lesson yet. How many times have you seen it where, oh, we'll just do this, we'll just do that because we can get away with it? One, particularly roads and concrete, that what you bury there is there for anybody to see later if they have the expertise and the time to find it.
Right.
You don't bury it. And it's clear that latent defects can be found much later. But to the point, at the time, it is quicker and easier to get the thing done the right way. And that in itself will avoid disputes. But to answer Jacqueline's question is, we've got to work at it. It's work in progress. We will never be without disputes. But at least if we have a dispute, let's make it on something that is meaningful and that we do learn out of it. Many disputes are based on pettiness.
Thank you very much. Irene would also like to find out if you could distinguish between arbitration and mediation.
Again, I'm very biased. I wouldn't go near arbitration if you paid me, if I could avoid it. But that is based on being bitten by arbitration. Mediation gives you the opportunity to change your mind, to see what is possible. And rather than a facilitative let me just get a book. If you have a mediation that is run by a person who is both schooled in contract law and has the technical skills relevant to your industry, you stand a very good chance of coming out with the right result. Arbitration, you can be absolutely right and come out with the wrong result. And if there is no appeal, that is the end of the matter. So my advice would be if you do go to arbitration, make sure there's an appeal clause.
Okay, thank you very much for the response. I would also like to find out, in your experiences so far, what are some key challenges or barriers that you face when it comes to the implementation of effective dispute avoidance measures?
I think it was mentioned earlier. We want to bury it under the table. Therefore, we do not approach it in a way that makes it easy. Let's say in general, what has been confirmed here today is that denial is one of the biggest problems to dispute avoidance and if not avoidance, resolution. So talking about it, bringing it out is a far better option in the long run.
Thank you very much. I understand Mr. Kwame Opompepra would like to make some inputs. We'd like to have you if you're ready now.
Okay, David, thank you for your presentation. I think you've been spot on trying to identify ways that we can avoid dispute. I would say that one of the things that we need to look at really is at drafting stage of the contract, because as much as possible, we tend to overlook, especially here in Ghana. I have observed a number of projects that people don't really take time to draft the contracts. They just pick it up per the standards and they just shove it in. And I think that is one of the major ways that brings out all our challenges here. And that is why people tend to say, hey, as for me, I'm not even going to go there because they will say that I'm a litigant. Meanwhile, there are challenges in the project that needs to be addressed. So I think that we need to look at drafting and also the people management bit. A lot more disputes can be avoided when a frank chat with the employer or the client and be sincere in it. Sometimes we hide behind technicalities and it makes our problems worse. So take time to draft and let's employ more of our people skills. Most definitely, at the end of the day, if we're able to solve the human problem, we would be able to avoid major disputes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. David.
Absolutely, that is spot on. What is starting to come into the works now is what is called collaborative construction. That the contractors and the engineer are on board before the actual contract is signed, so that a lot of these pitfalls are avoided down the line. Obviously, it has procurement challenges, whether it be a World Bank or a country, a government procurement. So it's got a long way to go before it gains acceptance, but that is one of the ways that a lot of those hurdles or pitfalls could be avoided.
Thank you very much. David, as we're wrapping up, okay, Yvonne.
I have a question for David. Akumia is my name.
Right, Mr. Akumia, you can go ahead.
Just a quick, sorry for taking back David to mediation. Normally, I know that mediation is supposed to be a voluntary resolution mechanism, but are parties allowed to have legal representation?
Absolutely. I don't think a mediator has any right to dictate who you have in a mediation. The danger, of course, is what is thrown at the lawyers is they start to then make the dispute about the law, where mediation is resolving the problem, whether in fact it is the absolute legal correct legally or not is not often the point.
I get it. All right, thank you.
You sound as if I haven't answered it correctly. The short
Excellent.
answer is you are allowed a lawyer. I would recommend if you do, let's say it's a construction dispute. If it is a lawyer, please make sure that the lawyer has some experience in construction disputes.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I get your point. He has to have a knowledge in construction industry, otherwise it's not going to give you a good say. Well, if I should wait, give you good job. That's what I should say, right? Thank you. I get your point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Akumia, for the question. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Okay, it seems we do not have any more questions. David, as we're wrapping up, are there any last words you'd like to leave with us, to take back with us as we continue?
I think what I'd like is, this is an ongoing, this is going to go on through everybody's career. And the only way we can improve it is by discussion. So if anybody has any question at any time, drop me an email and I'll do my best to either answer it or point that person in a direction where I think they will find the answer. Because collaboration is the way we are going to achieve anything.
Thank you very much. We'll take you on for that, definitely.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I would like to express my sincerest. Okay, Mr. Melume, would you want to say anything before we wrap up?
Yes, I would also like to add my voice to the thank yous and say, David, we really appreciate that you're able to make time to share your long years of experience in the industry with us. I hope that this becomes a continuing discussions. We can further develop other themes around which we can discuss this some more. I really appreciate that you're able to make time.
Thank you very much. And yes, I'd love to join you again sometime in the future.
Okay.
That would be nice.
All right. So I'd like to say thank you then to all our participants and to you, David, our esteemed guest speaker today. It's been very informative, and we're grateful that you made time today to join us to impact this knowledge or such knowledge to us. I'm sure that we'll be able to carry these lessons along with us and then also learn and grow ourselves, definitely. Thank you once again to everyone for actively participating and your thoughtful contributions, comments. And I wish you all continued success and look forward to connecting with you again next week. Until we meet again, take care, stay safe, and have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.